Right, good morning everybody. It is 10 o'clock. I'd like to welcome you to the corporate review meeting for Thursday the 10th of June. We are being broadcast, we are on webcast. For those of you who remember this is the way meetings used to be held. It's strange looking down and not seeing boxes around everybody that I can see from here, because I'm so used to seeing people on Zoom or Teams. The other thing I will say in terms of early administration is we've got the door open for ventilation, and if anybody gets too warm, gentlemen and ladies, if you so wish, you could remove your jackets. It does get a bit humid in here during the summer months. First thing we've got on the agenda is apologies.
Apologies, Chair, from Councillor Bernard Peters.
Thank you. Any other apologies known? Okay. Item 2 is declarations of interest. No, take that as no. So we come to the minutes. There are minutes of 2 meetings that have been held. First on the 21st of January. Are there any comments on those minutes? No, okay. And secondly, we have the minutes of the 5th of February. Any comments on those? No, okay. I will sign those as a true record. Which then brings us to the SEND Working Group final report. Hopefully members have seen this, and if you're following on the PDF, it's pages 11 to 16. Who's good? Okay. Councillor Spencer is going to introduce this on behalf of the committee that's looked at it.
I feel the need to stand up. Do we? Is that the protocol?
We don't normally do committee meetings, so
okay. No, that's even better. Thank you. Chair, thank you for that. This report that you can see here was presented by John Francis. Just for those members, new members who perhaps aren't familiar with this report, or actually the need for this report, there was, as it points out within it, there was a joint inspection made of our SEND provision by Ofsted and the Care Quality Committee back in November 18. It was quite a challenging report, to say the least, all 9 pages of the requirements that the authority had to address, part of which was a written statement of action was required. A decision that was made around that time was about Safer and Stronger Select Committee taking on the addressing of the particular issues and in particular that written statement. As members will see on the report here, it talks about significant areas of weakness. Unfortunately, it mentions ineffective leadership, families not getting the right support. And I think that the thing that struck me within it is they use a phrase of a sense of diminishing inclusivity, which I think is a shame. And the provision was judged to be lower than that nationally. It did also recognise, I think it's important to recognise, that improvements were being made, and a lot of people then had come together to address the particular issues as we move forward. I think I'd also like to say, I know that I was a member of this committee, but I was only included right at the very end. So there are other people that did most of the heavy lifting around this, and I know some of them are sitting in this chamber this morning. And it would be amiss of me not to say a huge thank you to all the efforts that they made in addressing this important report. I won't go through all of the various meetings, as members will see. They're itemised from March 2019, and it talked about various requirements that the group had right up until January of this year. As you will see, the report has stopped, mainly because a reassessment of the provision is expected quite soon. So we will be able to judge the progress that has been made around that. The only thing perhaps, Chair, that I would question, if I could, is that right at the very end it talks about the any further reporting and if anything comes from the more recent or the soon-to-be inspection. It talks about it going to Prosperous Select Committee or Safer and Stronger, which is now, of course, the Safeguarding Select Committee. I just wonder whether corporate review would be a better option for any subsequent reports. Bear in mind, it talks a lot about education, health and care. So I do think that that probably is the better place for these any subsequent reports to go. Having said that, if the committee feel that it should remain with safeguarding, I'm more than happy that we would do our best on those lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. I did notice the difference between item 10 on page 14 and item 12. Item 10 referring to prosperous and safe and strong, and item 12 referring to the education and skills aspect. I'll ask Nick to comment though.
The reason why this report is being brought back to corporate overview and scrutiny is it is cross-cutting. As you've identified, it covers at least 2 of our overview and scrutiny committees, and it is the officer's opinion that actually corporate should take a lead on following up any actions and any action plans and further discussions.
Councillor Withington.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I listened to what Bob says, but I've been on safeguarding, I think, crikey, 10 years now, and I think safeguarding is the right place to leave this with. I don't know what other members feel, but having been on that and heard all the reports and understand the problems with SENS, I think that's probably the right place. Safeguarding is very important, in my opinion, and we should leave it with them, and I think they've done as reasonable a job as you can expect under the circumstances. Thank you.
Any other comments? Councillor Conor Wildman.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think the basis of setting up the SEN working group was so it was select committee, so it was prosperous, it was safe and strong, and I'm going to forget the other one now, but the other committee as well, health. If it is the case that the report comes back from whoever will be scrutinising the work that we've already done, and it comes back that we requires improvement or inadequate or whatever else again, surely it would be the working group then to come back together to look at that issue again, rather than it just being seen by the safeguarding committee. But if it does come back that we have improved, then perhaps it should stay with safeguarding. That would be my suggestion, Chair.
Okay, well, I'll just reiterate what I was saying about the items 10 and 12 on page 14. The way I see it, this report is suggesting that the working group is expecting another service review, and at that point it would be prosperous or safe and strong that might look at that. But I think in terms of the strategic plan, which is item 12, I think the corporate review might be involved in terms of reviewing the the strategic plan and deciding if there's anything else that needs to be looked at. So I think we'll leave it as per the recommendation in the report that the further review is looked at by prosperous or safe and strong. Yeah, if that's the agreement of the committee, can I have that as a proposed and seconder? Proposed, seconded? Anybody? Yes, okay, thank you. We'll note that. Any other comments on the report? No? We'll take that as read. Which moves us to item 5, which is the work programme. We have got some guests here who I'll introduce at the far end of the room, the very far end. But first of all, Nick's going to explain the process in terms of the work programme for a recap for existing members and explanation for those that are new.
Thank you, Chairman. So all of our 4 overview and scrutiny committees are receiving at their initial meetings for the municipal year a work programming report. I must say we're holding these very early in the programme. In previous years this has been carried out in July, but we really wanted to get the committees up and running as soon as possible. So this is the second one. The third one is being held at Prosperous tomorrow, and then safeguarding is next Thursday. So by the end of the second, third week of June, we will have established and set the work programmes for all 4 overview and scrutiny committees. I won't go through the report in detail. I'm expecting members to have at least read it. It sets out your remit, it sets out the areas that you cover, it sets out, more importantly, that you are the overarching strategic overview and scrutiny committee for the council. So not only do you have your own work programme, you are expected to keep an oversight of the other 3 overview and scrutiny committees and their work programmes, to A, avoid duplication, to B, as we've just discussed with the 10 working group, to make sure that the right items are being discussed in the right places, and where you pick up items, maybe through the integrated performance reports that you receive on a quarterly basis, it's expected that you may make referrals to the other committees on areas of concern, particularly in respect of performance or service delivery. And I think there, Chair, you wanted me to hand over to our invited guests.
Thank you, Nick. On the previous item, I mentioned about the strategic plan, and we have got 3 guests at the far end of the table who I'll introduce now in terms of how this links to the plan for the next 4 years. Obviously, we've got a new council and therefore a new 4-year programme. So the speakers we've got at the other end are the leader, Alan White, Head of Service, John Tradewell, and Head of Finance, Rob Salmon. So first of all, Councillor White.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman, and welcome to members of the committee in the Chamber of Staffordshire County Council. I have to say, from the start, I think the Chamber really does lend itself to scrutiny committees. I think the format of having your interrogatee up here and you gathered down there is quite intimidating, and if that's the effect you're trying to achieve, you've certainly achieved it. So thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I would like to say, if I may, Mr. Chairman, a few words about overview and scrutiny and the role I see you fulfilling over the next few years. You'll have noticed the names of the committees have changed from Select Committee to Overview and Scrutiny Committee. That's because I'm often having conversations with people outside Staffordshire County Council, and when I referred to Select Committees, I was often having to say, well, that's exactly the same as an Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So, in my view, if it quacks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, and it swims like a duck, it's a duck. So therefore, we've reverted back to the Overview and Scrutiny name. One of the aspects of Overview and Scrutiny Committees that I think is particularly important is the role of overview, that is looking forward, as well as scrutiny, which is looking at current decisions. And I do hope that the Overview and Scrutiny Committees are able to embrace both those elements, because I think it's very important that the Executive has new ideas coming forward to help it run the Council. Not all those new ideas will necessarily be taken up, but some of those ideas can help us run a better council, and that's in the interests of all 880,000 people that we represent. I don't want to understate the importance of scrutiny. I was chairman of Corporate Review Committee for 4 years, a long time ago, and the impact that good scrutiny has on the workings of the council shouldn't be underestimated. I'd also note that in a place where we have a very big majority of one party, the role of scrutiny, I think, becomes doubly important, because you can rely on scrutiny holding the executive to account in one set of circumstances, and you'd rely on the opposition to hold the council to account in other sets of circumstances. Well, in a world where the opposition is up against it because of reduced numbers, then I think it's really important that this scrutiny committee in particular holds the authority, its finances and the strategic plan to account. That is the reason why the majority of the makeup of this committee is some of the most senior councillors on the council. Many of you are chairman of committees in your own right, and Mike Worthington over there is chairman of audit, which is one of our most important regulatory committees to make sure that we are doing the do, so to speak, as far as the money is concerned. This is the principal scrutiny committee. That means that the work programmes from this principal scrutiny committee are coordinated here, and the liaison that goes on between the scrutiny committee chairs of the other committees are brought together under the auspices of corporate, and I hope that that coordination takes place so that there isn't any duplication of effort, Mr. Chairman, across the scrutiny piece, because that's not beneficial to anybody. And I think you've already had a conversation about the SEND report, which illustrates that sort of mature conversation about where scrutiny should take place is what we would expect to take place in the next few years. I spoke with Cabinet yesterday about the importance of being present for overview and scrutiny committees. Cabinet members need to make themselves available to scrutiny committees to ensure that they're held to account. And I've made sure that Cabinet members are aware of my expectations around that, so that they they attend when required. Of course, there are going to be times when Cabinet members can't attend due to holidays and sickness, but my general expectation is when you as scrutiny chairs and scrutiny committees call somebody to be present from Cabinet, then they are present to be held to account. The other thing that's really important is for Cabinet members to participate in is triangulation meetings. The triangulation meetings are for new members. That's where the chairman and vice chairs of the committee come together with the relevant portfolio holders to talk about what's going on in their world, to make sure that everything that needs to be scrutinised appropriately is scrutinised appropriately. And my expectations are that Cabinet members will be open and transparent with the relevant scrutiny committees so that you can do your job effectively, and we are seen to be a transparent authority that is able to be held to account. There are some aspects of the summary of your work at the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee which may need tweaking, I may suggest, Mr. Chairman. So holding the leaders to account, absolutely. The Deputy Leader, the majority of his portfolio is in the economy area, so it would probably be under prosperous rather than here necessarily. But certainly the finance portfolio holder, I'd expect him to be spending quite a bit of time here. Rob Salmon, as the County Treasurer, is here today for precisely that reason. There are gaps in our scrutiny at the moment. The scrutiny of the Local Enterprise Partnership, I'll put it on the table now, is very, very poor. And that's not due to anything that this authority has done, it's the way the LEP has been set up, but it really does need strengthening, because the scrutiny of the Greater Birmingham and Solihull Local Enterprise Partnership is stronger than it is of the Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent Local Enterprise Partnership, and I hope we'll be able to do something about that. As it stands, the strategic plan, Mr. Chairman, is being worked on. We have a number of areas that we are starting to develop as a consequence of our ambitions post-election. And for many of you, I've already set out at the full council meeting that took place a few weeks ago what our ambitions are for this authority over the next 4 years. These will be developed after a Cabinet Away Day, which will be taking place next week and beyond, but certainly in areas like highways, infrastructure, education, economies and skills, adult social care, children, public health, finance and communities. There are a raft of ambitions that we have for this authority, which have to be funded, which is where Mr. Salmon comes in, because he has the money, or not, as the case may be. But we are ambitious for this authority. We're ambitious for Staffordshire. We want to improve the lot of the people who live here through the work that we do as Staffordshire County Council. Mr. Chairman, there is also an area which is vitally important to the coherence of this county, and that's the work we do with our districts and borough colleagues. It is fair to say that over the past year or so, the relationship with district and borough colleagues has improved out of recognition. And that in part has been driven by the work we've been obliged to do through the COVID-19 pandemic. It has strengthened relationships, it has deepened relationships, and I hope that we can continue that moving forward. I'd hope that the Corporate Review Committee could take a look at some of those relationships and perhaps through the overview role suggest ways of augmenting them and strengthening them, albeit not necessarily through individual streams of work through economy and highways and things you'd expect that way, but also through our strategic linkages, however they may manifest themselves. So, Mr. Chairman, that is my opening statement. I'm more than happy to, through you, to take any questions that people might have, but I'm back with you.
Thank you, Councillor White. We'll move on to other guests in a minute, but are there any questions specifically for Councillor White on what he's just said? Yes.
Thank you. Apologies, I probably should declare an interest. Councillor White spoke about the GBS LEP and the scrutiny function there, and obviously I'm a director of the GBS LEP, albeit we didn't discuss it in deep, but it's just in case we go too far into that. Quick question. You spoke very much about holding Cabinet members to account. and you started off speaking about overview and direction. So how do you see the Cabinet and the Cabinet members using overview and scrutiny in the policy development side of things? Because it's not just about holding the Cabinet to account. There's a resource here to assist in setting direction and set policy. I just wondered how you see that fitting in.
Councillor White?
So there's a whole host of areas. I'll give perhaps 3 or 4 examples to illustrate the point. In adult social care, there's a potential of using technology in new ways to deliver adult social care. For the overview function of the Health and Care Committee, what are they? How do they work in other places? How would we apply them in Staffordshire? They're questions that could be usefully posed and answered through the Health and Care Overview and Scrutiny Committee. When it comes to finance, there are different ways of funding our ambitions. Local authority bonds, investing in assets from which we derive a return. What do they look like and how could we make use of them? In economy and skills, the government talks about levelling up. There is a white paper due in the autumn to define levelling up. But what does levelling up mean in Staffordshire and how would it manifest itself when we apply it to Staffordshire residents? On highways, we have a problem with the roads. They're full of potholes. We need to get them sorted. Is it done better elsewhere? And are there examples where the Overview and Scrutiny Committee or the overview function perhaps could go and visit a place that do it better and bring the information back and say, we've seen it done better, we've seen it done more efficiently, you should be thinking about delivering this in Staffordshire. We know what our ambitions are, and we're working on that through the strategic plan. Some of the solutions to delivering those ambitions are as yet unknown, Councillor Oates, and it is through the overview function that we will hopefully see some of those ideas come forward. It may well be that some of them are insoluble and that we will just work our way through some of those issues together, but sometimes new ideas coming forward that have been thought through by the overview component of a scrutiny committee, I think could add real benefit. I've given you 4 examples. I could witter on ad nauseum on this, Mr. Chairman, but I shan't.
We have another question from Councillor Atkins.
You've spoken about the relationship with district and borough councils having improved, which is obviously great news. And one of the challenges, I think, faced by district and boroughs, indeed, and parish and town councils, is the demise of the high street. And I would certainly like to investigate how the county council can work with district and boroughs to open up those high streets to perhaps other uses. Nobody wants to see a high street blighted by empty shops rapidly deteriorating, and that's one area which I think does require a lot of cooperation between town, parish, district and county council, and indeed also voluntary organisations as well, to perhaps repurpose, at least on a temporary basis, those empty high streets. And I wondered whether that's something which you would value as something we could scrutinise about how we could take that forward quite quickly, I think, because I think it's quite important that as our economy nationally regenerates, we want to make sure that no town is left behind.
Councillor White?
That's a really good question. And the role of the public sector in the delivery of the recreation or recrudescence of the public estate is something that is vitally important. We've done it on a couple of occasions across Staffordshire. So the move of the library from Friary Library into the St Mary's in Lichfield, the city of Lichfield, has made a huge impact on the footfall, in the jargon, or the number of people coming into the city centre. And that helps to drive the economy. There is a big role for the public sector to play in delivering assets in the centre of towns to recreate the way towns feel. It is wishful thinking to think that just application of dollops of cash here, there and everywhere is going to do anything other than recreate shop fronts that aren't going to be used. So we need to think slightly more broadly about that. I had a great meeting with Cannock Chase District Council senior members last week about the possibilities of reconfiguring their town centre. I've been invited by Tamworth Borough Council and have already attended a meeting with representatives from Tamworth Borough Council on the same issue. We know it's going on in Newcastle under Lyme, and so I think it's really important that we think about how those public sector assets from the NHS through to the county council, to the district councils, to other public departments, use their requirement to have a presence in town centres to deliver activity, which in turn delivers economic growth. So yes is the answer to long-winded.
Councillor Atkins.
Could I come back with another question, possibly? Given what a huge amount of our budget is dedicated to social care, I would very much like to look at the finances of social care post-pandemic, because obviously we have the fragility of the of care homes, nursing homes, but also the interrelationship really between home care, which we provide, including looking at the eligibility criteria, and how we can bolster that so that we try and delay or stop more people going into care homes, and also at the relationship between council-funded placements in care homes and those people who are self-funders, because I think it's the case, and maybe this investigation would confirm or deny that, that self-funders pretty much subsidise council-funded places, and I don't think that given the fragility of the care market before the pandemic, I suspect that many have become more fragile during the pandemic, and I think this is an area that we need to look at in terms of the future, because as we don't yet have a funding package from government or a 10-year plan from government, I think it's really important that we look at that whole area of the funding, not obviously the delivery, because clearly that's something for health scrutiny, but really the funding side, and whether in fact the funding model is fit for purpose going forward, given that we're still waiting for some sort of statement from government about how it's going to work, and that this could be, you know, several years in the making. So I think we need to look at that whole area certainly over the short term, if not over the longer term.
Did you want to respond to that, Councillor White?
Your characterisation of the care market becoming more fragile is accurate, and the County Council, through government allocations, has provided funding to support the care market during the course of the pandemic, for obvious reasons. The cost of adult social care is a function of three things: volume, that's the number of people going into it; acuity, how sick they are when they go in; and price, how much we charge or how much is charged. The question, I suppose, for the overview component of the Health and Care Committee is there something that is there an intervention that is available to us to delay the time at which people go in, so that that equation of volume, acuity and price doesn't kick in too soon? What can we do to increase healthy life expectancy across Staffordshire, so that we defer the point at which they go into the inevitable point of care? How sustainable is the fragmented care market that we've got? It is the case that we have a highly fragmented care market across Staffordshire, particularly, as you know very well from where you come from, Charlotte, Councillor Atkins, from the north of the county. And then I suppose the final question that flows on from that is, what is the role of the public sector and the ability of us to develop care facilities as a result of the fragmentation in the market, so that we start to perhaps consolidate the market and help the market survive, because we need it to survive. Can it survive in its current form? Don't know. I'm obviously looking at Councillor Pert there with questions that would be rightly for his committee.
As if by magic, Councillor Pert has indicated next.
I was going to ask a question, actually, or two questions. But all of the things that you mentioned, Councillor White, in your last response are things that were discussed on Monday at the Health and Care Overview and Scrutiny Committee and will be on the forward plan going forward, you'll be pleased to know. And we intend to make sure that we have a good understanding from all quarters on that. I just wanted to pick up on two elements, please. First of all, in terms of partnership working, one of the learnings from the pandemic was the importance of partnership working, and that no one organisation can deliver a solution effectively to our residents, and we've all got different stakes in delivering solutions. So by working closer together, we stand more chance of delivering it, and particularly when resources are extraordinarily tight, the best way of using resources is by working together on that. You mentioned obviously districts and boroughs. Your answer to the question on high streets sort of slightly broadened that, and that was probably where I was going to go to, which was you've probably seen that Digital Stockport has launched an open sharing platform for data. So where is your aspiration in terms of data sharing and then sharing of objectives and focus? You know, across all types of stakeholders, whether that's the NHS as a stakeholder, districts and boroughs as a stakeholder, or communities. That was my first question. Probably I'll leave it there if I can come back. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor White.
In the interests of openness, honesty and transparency, I've given no consideration to data sharing, Mr. Chairman, so I can't answer that question. But I will be interested to see what the possibilities are. But Mr. Tradewell has indicated.
Save that for when Mr. Tradewell speaks. Are there any other questions for the leader? Councillor Pert.
Yeah, the second question I got really was, I mean, clearly we're coming out of the pandemic, I sincerely hope. That isn't a prediction, it's just a hope. There is the opportunity for us to build back better, but for us as a county council to maximise that, we need to be fleet of foot. Do you see us as fleet of foot today? And if not, how do you see us being more nimble and agile and taking the opportunities that are there?
There's an inherent tension between developing a strategy which sets out the steps you want to take over the next 4 years and responding to opportunities as they arise. One of the I suppose frustrations I've had over a while now is that we haven't had, to use a jargon phrase, oven-ready projects to respond to opportunities when they arise. I've been discussing this with the local enterprise partnership. The government, I don't know if it's a government of all persuasions, but the government of this persuasion in particular tends to come up with ideas for money like that. Boom, we're looking for shovel-ready sites and we want to go now. What Staffordshire County Council needs to do to respond to that is to have almost like the members' pigeonholes downstairs with project A, B, C and D. When government says, we've got money for this, we just pull it off, change the date, tweak a few things, run it through the scrutiny committee, and hey presto, off we go. And I think that will be a huge addition to our flexibility. So long as those projects fit within our strategy, we cannot be buffeted around too much. We've got to be strategy-led rather than opportunity-driven. Otherwise, we're like so much flotsam and jetsam on the ocean, aren't we? Just being buffeted around by the waves and just sniffing around for opportunities rather than delivering an overall strategy. But the way to be fleet of foot is to make sure that those projects and ideas are ready, as close to being ready to go as possible, so that when government does offer us those opportunities, then we can dust them off and move forward. There is certainly a role for overview and scrutiny on that, where you say, actually, should this opportunity arrive? I've looked at my tea leaves. I can see that it's looking like this is the direction that the government's going to go. I think we ought to be able to respond in this way, work with your appropriate cabinet member to come up with some proposals about how things can be delivered. And I think it's particularly relevant in your area, absent any social care green paper, absent any social green paper till the day I retire at the rate we're going, I'm afraid to say.
Councillor James Salisbury.
Morning, Alan. As a brand new member, this might be a question that only I want to ask, but it occurs to me that in my normal life, which is in more of a business type setting, normally you'd want to get a macro overview first of all before you start to dive in to decide what actions you want to take. And I personally, sat here today, have not been afforded that macro overview of where the issues may lie. And I wonder, does the county or the executive team have a balanced scorecard type approach where we have, or where we could have a list of all the key performance targets that you are trying to achieve? Are they numerated? Can we know where we sit against each of them? Are they benchmarked so that as a team we can take a more macro view before we dive into the detail? Thank you.
Councillor White?
The answer to those questions is yes. So the strategic plan for this authority will come through this committee for consideration. That gives you the macro overview. And then every quarter, given the scale of the organisation, it's not done more frequently than that, but every quarter, it comes to this committee, isn't it? The quarterly reports come to this committee for consideration and reflection. The finances are part of that, and the other aspect of I suppose, measuring ourselves against other authorities is there are metrics available through things like the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, which is known in the jargon as CIPFA, Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, and they do comparator measures so that you can see, for example, there are aspects of the authority which might be high spending but very high quality. There might be aspects of the authority that are low spending but high quality. There might be, and let's be honest with ourselves, there might be aspects of the authority which are high spending and not as good quality as they ought to be. And that is then on you to ask questions about why are you spending this amount of money when, I don't know, Leicestershire, for example, is spending less on the same subject. What do they do differently to us? And these are the sort of questions that help the executive to run the authority by asking those questions by comparison to other authorities. And you'll get that opportunity through the quarterly reports that come before you, which I will be present, and the Cabinet Member for Finance will be present, plus Mr Tradewell and Mr Salmon.
Yes, for members' benefit, it would have been ideal to have the performance report for this meeting, but the timing's not to our advantage. The next opportunity for the performance report to be reviewed by Cabinet will be the 21st of July, and then we have a meeting on the 29th of July when we would review that. So that will be the first opportunity to see that, and hopefully it will make more sense when you've seen that. Any other questions for the leader before we pass on to Mr Tradewell? No? We'll go on to John Tradewell, who's Director of Corporate Services, and already you've got data sharing as one of your subjects to cover.
Thank you, Chair. If it's helpful to members, I've got a couple of slides just to go through which will perhaps introduce you to the team that I have in corporate services, and then I'll go on to suggest 10 areas that we're currently focused on that may spark some thoughts in terms of your work programme. I'll just run through these fairly quickly. So, corporate services, I'm the director. I work to 3 portfolio holders who have different responsibilities for bits of my area. Obviously the leader, Councillor White, is one of those. Ian Parry, as the finance portfolio holder, is responsible for a good chunk of corporate services. And then Mark DeVille, he has a responsibility around the commercial and assets part of the business as well. So all 3 of those may at some point come to you to report on the progress in this area. There are 7 reports that people that report directly to me. Just running down this fairly quickly. Starts with Rob Salmon, who's the County Treasurer, and the functions that he is responsible for are listed there, but all the things that you would expect in that finance portfolio. Anne-Marie Davidson, she's the County Solicitor, so that's law and democratic services, basically. Andrew Donaldson, who's listed there, he's the Assistant Director for Strategy and Transformation. I think it's his last working day today, so we're putting in place interim arrangements in that part of the world. And the 2 people that will be well, there's 3 people that will be taking on that responsibility for a period of time. Kerry Dove, she's the head of strategy and digital, I think is her job title. She'll take on part of that role. Christian Marcucci, he's the head of our communications team. He's going to take on part of that role. And also Alex Thorogood, who heads up the change team, will take on part of the role. And we'll do that for an interim period to see how the strategy develops as the organisation moves through the summer. And then we'll make some decisions on the permanent solution for that part of the world, in a few months' time. But that area covers digital, communications, change, fleet care, has responsibility for our strategic delivery managers and our partnership working, amongst other things. And I just mentioned on this, Kerry Dove, who I have mentioned, she heads up our insight function, and she's responsible essentially for the data in the organisation. And just picking up the point that was made around how we use our data, how we use our data with partners, that's an area that she's very interested in. I think she's made great strides in that area during the pandemic. I think that sort of data sharing with the NHS is now much more advanced and refined than it has been in the past, and the arrangements are in place. The next stage, I think, is more around how we get the most out of the data we hold collectively with our partners in Staffordshire. There's a group that meets of senior figures in Staffordshire, including the leader of the council, called Network Staffordshire. And one of the areas they've looked to focus on is that data analytics piece, to think about how we can make use of the data we have to really target and focus our resources more effectively in the future as a partnership in Staffordshire. And we've set up something called the Staffordshire Centre for Data Analytics, which is in its very early stages. It's a joint venture between us, the police, and Keele University, with a view to trying to make, learn the lessons of how to make better use of that data. So I'm sure that we'll be sharing more on you about that as we go along over the next year or two. Sarah Getley, also Assistant Director for People Services. So that's our human resources and organisational development function. So we have about 4,000 odd employees as an organisation, and they make sure that we manage them in an effective way. Tracy Thorley, the Assistant Director for Corporate Operations. So that business support in the organisation, information governance, customer services, our kind of call centre operations, complaints and appeals, registration services, and also our civil contingencies work. And Tracy's done a great deal of work over the past 15 months in working with Richard Harling on the pandemic, and I think has been the operational lead for that, supporting Richard. Ian Turner, he has commercial and assets. So commercial is largely our procurement. So we procure hundreds of millions of pounds worth of goods and services each year. So his team help us with that. ICT, all our ICT is managed by Ian's team. And strategic property as well. So we have a very large property portfolio, again, in the value of hundreds of millions of pounds. And again, Ian's team are responsible for managing those. I think when last time we looked, we still had about 500 operational properties or something in that order. It is a huge number still that we have to run our business. And Melanie Stokes, she's the Assistant Director for Treasury and Pensions. Largely that's about managing our pensions. So we manage the pensions for, well, there's 110,000 members of our pension scheme. Some are in receipt of pensions, some are paying into the pension scheme, some are deferred members. And there are 500 employees, give or take, employers, give or take, that whose employees are in our pension scheme. Assets, at last count, approaching £5.9 billion. And I think really important to Staffordshire as well, is the pay bill every year is something like £200 million or thereabouts. So putting quite a bit of money into the economy through that pensions service. But I think that just in terms of the other functions, I think come within the remit of your committee. Pensions comes under the remit of Pensions Committee, and they report to full council on how that pensions service is progressing. Altogether, corporate services, there's about 898 employees at last count, plus I think 150 odd casuals, mostly working in the registrar's area. And then just going on to the next slide, just a few things that are, I suppose, top of my mind when I was putting this together. I think the biggest thing at the moment for us to work on is that development of the new strategic plan and MTFS. The senior leadership team are getting together with the Cabinet in a few weeks' time to really start that work. And I'm sure that will lead to a number of new policy initiatives in the Council that we'll need to be sharing with Corporate Review. And I'm sure one or two of those will end up in your work programme at some point during the year. And we'll keep you informed on the progress of that. And essentially that's about where do we want to be in 4 years' time at the next elections? What do we want to have achieved? And that will come through as a plan and a new medium-term financial strategy, which will be signed off by the Council next spring. And the committee will be heavily involved in that plan process and in the MTFS financial scrutiny process along the way. New councils just mentioned there as well. It is a bit of an unusual situation we have this year in terms of inducting a new council and getting it all up and running again. That's something we're focusing on at the moment. And there'll be various things we need to sort of pick up as part of that. Probably not something for you to think about in terms of your work programme, but it is something that we're focused on at the moment. Next on the list, a bit of a random one, cybersecurity. One of the biggest risks to any big organisation like ourselves, it's really important we have good cybersecurity arrangements in place. We think we do, but there are, I think, still areas that we need to improve on because when local authorities have been held to ransom over cybersecurity, it is hugely devastating to their operations, takes them months to catch up, and it will cost millions and millions of pounds to put right if we ever get into that situation. So it is an item that has to be pretty much high up on our risk registers. And then the next one is really more about digital, but the latest thing we're doing is rolling out Office 365 and Teams. I think most people now have that on their laptops and computers, but I think the next stage as part of that is to make sure the organisation takes maximum advantage of the opportunities that they present to us to work in that digital way. I think it's also got huge implications for how we manage information as an organisation, and that affects everyone in the organisation. We're going to have to change our ways of working as part of that, so it has a really big impact. But I think that digital council piece more generally is something that this committee was probably want to be interested in at some point. We're increasingly moving our communications between us and our residents to digital means, and making sure that is done really well, I think is really important for this council and how it relates to its citizens. Care Director replacement. One of our biggest ICT systems is Care Director. It supports our work in children's and adults social care, and we're getting to a point in the next year or so where we have to make some really big decisions about what we're going to do with that system. It's coming to the end of its life with us under its current procurement. We've just upgraded it, or in the process of just upgrading it, but we need to start thinking about what the future is for that system. Largely that's a matter, I guess, for other committees to focus on the detail of what we're trying to do there, but it is a massive corporate project when we get into that. There's only so many sort of big ICT things you can do at any one time. That will suck up a huge amount of organisational resource to make sure that goes well, and there are some very big decisions we need to make as part of that. Do we have one system for adults and one system for children? Do we continue to have one system for both? How do we get to having a system that works a lot better than Care Director has? A really important decision for the organisation. Probably not a matter for your immediate radar, but at some point during the year you might want to think about that one. Entrust I've mentioned there. That's a company. We have a 49% stake in Entrust. The 51% is owned by Capita. It emerged from our education support services 8, 9, 10 years ago now. And over time, it has sort of shrunk in terms of the services we commission from Entrust. We get about £11 million worth of services from there now, half of which tend to be property services. But we entered into an arrangement for 20 years, but we're coming to that halfway point where we have some big decisions to make around, do we continue as we are, or do we use the break provisions that are in the contract to do something very different with what's in that entrust relationship? I know it's been an issue over years where members have had some concerns about how well that relationship is working for the council and for other organisations. So again, I think that's something you'll probably take an interest in at some point over the next year. The break point is March 2023. We have to take a decision by March 2022 as to what our future relationship with Entrust will be. Staffordshire Place brand, done a great deal of work over the past year, commissioned some work from someone called John Till, and conscious, I think, that Staffordshire is a place which is asset rich and perception poor in many cases. This is intending to address that so that as well as being asset rich as a county, we are perception rich as a county. So we've started that work. We have some great branding in place now, but this is one of those long-term projects. It's going to take us many years to get to that situation where we are perception rich as well as asset rich. And again, might be an issue that you want to focus on and see that that is progressing well and that the reputation of Staffordshire as a place is changing through that work. And then some sort of more internally focused pieces there. The people strategy, this is a review essentially of our ways of working as an employer, looking to make ourselves the employer of choice in Staffordshire, changing every single one of our employment policies, trying to rewrite those. In the past, I think a lot of our policies have been written for the 1% of our employees who aren't performing well and how we deal with those. I think we're looking to have our policies much more supportive of the 99% who are, thoroughly committed, dedicated, hard-working public servants, how we make life easier for those through that process, and as I say, make ourselves the employers of choice. I've sometimes used the phrase that we want to be the Netflix of local government, in the sense they have some really short, sharp, punchy policies that tell you how people need to behave, and then just leave them to get on with it. Because I think we want to be an organisation that's much more empowering of our employees, just lets them get on with and do their job, because by and large, every one of those is committed to doing a great job for the organisation. How do we help them do that is what that piece of work's all about. Related to that, we're looking at our recruitment process as well. If you ever looked at our recruitment to see how easy it is to become an employee of the county council, I think you'll find it's quite a clunky process. It's a clunky process for us as managers to get to the point of recruiting people. It's a clunky process for people wanting to join the organisation. So we need to improve that. There are some areas of the organisation where it is difficult to recruit. Children's social workers, for example, there's a lack of those at the moment that we need to address. I have trouble recruiting certain types of solicitors to my legal team. So I think if we can get better at that, the branding of the organisation in terms of how we do our recruitment, and make that process feel a lot slicker and more inviting to people to come into the organisation, and just make it quicker and make sure people get better feedback through the process. I think we can improve those recruitment mechanisms, and that will help us make sure we have the staff we need to do our job. And then the final one, we've changed hugely over the past 15 months as we've been through the pandemic. Pretty much on day one, the whole organisation was sent home to do its work from home. We equipped them very quickly to be able to do their work from home. But now we're coming to the end of the pandemic. What are our plans for how we're going to work as an organisation in the future? You can already see, I think, the signs that the pendulum's swinging back a little bit the other way. I was maybe working from home 4 days a week. Now I'm sort of like 2 or 3 days a week working from home. And you are starting to see more and more people coming back into the organisation. And there's a question about where we want that pendulum to sort of settle when we get back into that sort of, back into the swing fully. And again, that's something that has implications, I think, for you to consider as the corporate committee. You might want to have some say in the design of that, or help us with the design of what that looks like in the future. But it is an important decision for the future of the organisation. So those are just sort of 10 areas that we're working on at the moment. Just sort of throw them in there to see whether that sparks any interest in terms of the work programme. But again, as has been said by the leader, there is a regular performance report that will come to this committee that will tell you warts and all where we are on these and many other issues, and there'll be plenty of opportunities for you to pick up on those issues as we go through the next 4 years. Thank you, Chair.
John, you mentioned cyber security, but do you want to cover data sharing as an issue?
Well, data sharing, we do have good arrangements now in place with all our partner organisations that we're working with in Staffordshire to share data appropriately. There's a range of mechanisms that we've had for some time. So members will probably be aware that if they've been around for a while, that we have a multi-agency safeguarding hub, for example, that works largely on the children's safeguarding side, based where you have the police, ourselves, health organisations, all based together where that data sharing takes place. We do have really strong data sharing arrangements now with the National Health Service through the pandemic. That's been strengthened enormously. And we have very good data arrangements, I think, with the district councils as well. So I think that data sharing does take place on a practical basis. As I think I was suggesting, the next stage is how we make better use of that data. We've learned an awful lot during the pandemic, so we have data now that has enabled us to kind of pinpoint where these outbreaks are in communities, down to sort of street level, to know which few houses where the issue is in terms of the pandemic, and that's enabled us to get in there and respond much faster, targeting our resources on a very small area, rather than having to kind of do that sort of, I suppose, whole kind of carpet bombing of an area approach when you need to sort of take action. I think that's one of the things that's going to be really advantageous to local government services in the future. If we can use that data effectively and really target our resources, that issue of resources for the organisation can be made easier by us using that data in a much more effective way. And so I said we've got this sort of emerging Staffordshire Centre for Data Analytics we set up with Keele and with the police, and the idea is that will start to help us learn the lessons of how we make better use of data to make us more effective and efficient as an organisation in the future.
Okay. I think Councillor Pert wanted to come back in.
I did actually, very specifically on the data sharing, because unfortunately, sitting with many hats on, I'm not sure that the aspiration meets reality. And I think I would probably encourage maybe a discussion with the broadest range of partners to see whether they feel that the aspiration is actually what's being delivered on the ground. Because I have to say, I've spoken about data sharing for years and years and years, and at a district level, frankly, it is not quite as good as it could be. In my view, there is a huge opportunity, and second of all, what Stockport is talking about is open data. So they're putting all of their data in one place, putting it safe. Obviously, you don't want to reveal, safeguarding issues and some of those things, but for other people to then access it. And when you look at technology and how some of the technology startups work, they're fleet of foot. They'll pick up a piece of data, say, I can do this, this, and this with it. Look how, Google has used data for all sorts of things in terms of their analytics. And I would suggest that, actually that's probably a different approach to what's being talked about. I'd be more than happy to have a discussion on that, because I think there is some huge opportunities. We don't hold the keys to every solution, and there are lots of things that we all need to do to deliver the wider solution, in my view.
Councillor White has indicated.
If I could just respond to that point. I think that there is there are a set of challenges around data sharing which we need to be cognizant of. The attitude around data sharing tends to be what you can't do rather than what you can do. And that's preventing some organisations from moving forward on the data sharing piece. Just off the top of my head, you've got 4 large organisations in Staffordshire. The Department for Work and Pensions, Police, NHS and Social Services collecting and curating data on individuals, but not sharing it. There are many instances across this county, particularly in places like Cannock, where you've got individuals who are known to each of those 4 organisations, are drawing resources and effort from each of those 4 organisations. We ran a project on Blake, if John Tradewell will remember that, many years ago to try and use that data to have a more effective response from the public sector on the lives of individuals. But with each of those organisations individually collecting and curating data, it means that the effectiveness of the response is minimised because they're not speaking to each other. So the question we've been asking ourselves over the past year or two is how do we think about the things that we can share for the benefit of individuals across the county rather than the things that we know we can't share. So for example, criminal records, safeguarding issues, clearly you can't share those sort of issues, but there are certain things and certain indicators that we have that would allow us to better and more effectively target our response. A great example with districts and boroughs is the district and boroughs know when somebody's coming up to pension age, for example, and things like the conversations about living wills or even have you made a will, have you had conversations with your relatives about your care as you get older, what are your ambitions for your this phase in your life. These would all help reduce the costs to the public sector, but it's about, as you correctly point out, data sharing. But unfreezing that mindset is something that's a bit of a challenge, but we're working on it, and I look forward to any views that you might have through your committee, Councillor Pert.
Thank you for that. Councillor Spencer.
No, thank you for that. And I think that's quite encouraging around how we do that data sharing. Bear in mind, one of the pieces of legislation, certainly as far as the police were concerned, was back in 1998 around sharing that data that we still perhaps, not us, but nationally, perhaps isn't quite right. The two things I would mention, though, I think, is that it is an improving picture, certainly over the few years that I've been involved in the Safer and Stronger Committee. The introduction of local panels in each of the areas, I think, greatly increases that intelligence and data sharing. I do think, though, that we're probably exposed around some of those organisations that we employ to do part of our tasks. And the obvious one for me is things like Catch-22, where they are not yet completely part of that data sharing, which I think then raises issues around safeguarding. And I was encouraged to hear the bit about what do we do with the data once we have it, because there is a danger we become data rich and intelligence poor, and about what does that data mean to us. And again, I think that's an ideal way forward. So, also, thank you.
Okay, can I just ask a question following up from what Mr. Tradewell mentioned about the Staffordshire Place brand? You mentioned being the county being asset rich, and I presume you're meaning not just physical assets, but things like community and diversity and the events and social intermixing. Is it something that potentially there might be an opportunity for us to get involved in?
Yeah, I think there's it is all those things, isn't it? As we're hugely rich in physical assets, but then lots of other assets, the businesses that we have in Staffordshire. There's a huge variety of excellent businesses in Staffordshire. There's great pubs and restaurants. We're blessed with those in Staffordshire. And as you've said, our communities are one of our great strengths as well, and have proved to be the case over the past 2 years, as they've made a huge difference in terms of Staffordshire getting through through COVID. So all those things are part of that brand that we're trying to promote more widely. And yes, I think members will have opportunities to get involved in that work. But there's a programme we're setting up around Staffordshire ambassadors. Again, that sort of, I suppose, helping to equip people so that they do know what we're doing around that branding work, to make sure when they have their various engagements with others within and outside Staffordshire, they can do some of that promotion of Staffordshire as well, and also can help steer that work as it develops. So I will certainly take that back and talk to colleagues about how we make sure that members are fully plugged into that work on the brand.
Councillor Pert again.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to raise two other points. One was there is a role, I think, within corporate services for being an ambassador on climate change. Now, I accept that climate change doesn't necessarily sit in this committee, but it is a cross-cutting issue. And actually, you know, us as a procurer of services and us as a partner with others, you know, we have a role that we can help encourage others to join in the fight to get to net zero. And I think that's something that we should have somewhere within our discussions, because if we don't do it, it's a huge missed opportunity, and if we're not careful, there is more of a burden that falls on us to get to net zero. Actually, if we all do a little bit, it helps. You know, and that might be in terms of walking to work or encouraging walking to school. It might be in terms of home working. It might be in terms of, you know, our supply base. That's the first one. The second one was, it strikes me that if you were a district or borough, you'd talk about shared services. And actually, I always remember Councillor Philip Atkins' conversation about if there was a single provision of waste services, it would save £8 million a year to the residents of this county. Now, I'm not sure whether that's true or not. It makes no real difference whether it's true or not. The principle's the same, which is where are the other opportunities for us to leverage outside of our base? Because, you know, we have a big base. And where are those other opportunities and who's looking for them? Because I'm not saying they're all going to land, because that's about whether we can make the numbers stack up and the benefits stack up and the partnerships stack up. But I do think that that's something that we should have somewhere on our radar. So we're not just procuring our stuff, we may be delivering in a different way. Thank you, Chair.
So just,
John Shadewell.
just picking up then on those 2 points. So on climate change, the corporate lead for that does sit outside corporate services and in environment, infrastructure and skills. So Darryl Ayres and his team tend to be the policy leads on that. But no, it is very much embedded in the work we're doing in corporate services as well. So again, we track very carefully things like our carbon footprint around our buildings, and that has been reduced significantly over recent years and will continue to be reduced. It is something that we've built into our procurement practices. So again, every time we procure contracts, we are conscious of the need to reduce that carbon footprint. In terms of fleet care, we are now looking at how over time, and it will take some time, we kind of move our fleet from being, you know, a diesel fleet to being a environmentally friendly fleet. So all those things are kind of embedded in how we work. And again, you've made the point around the people side as well. How we work as an organisation has a significant impact as well on our carbon footprint, and that has reduced during the pandemic. And one of the considerations about what kind of organisation we want to be is that sort of climate change aspect of that. In terms of shared services, and there are a range of services that we do already share with partners as well, probably fewer than we might like to, but yes, we do a great deal of that. And that's something I think that we look at from time to time with the cabinet through the away days and the kind of you know, the policy brainstorming that we do undertake. And I'm sure that there'll be various ideas for how we can improve on various of those that will come up when we do have the away day. But yeah, we're constantly looking for those ideas as to how we can make ourselves more efficient and effective. And if that involves us working with others, we're very happy to do that. And we've done some considerable joint working as well. Again, the example that springs to mind is around the NHS. I think we're one of the pioneers of working very closely with the NHS around adult social care. And we do have a joint arrangement there to sort of work with the MPFT or whatever the current initials are around that. So that does go on, and sometimes on quite a scale, and it is something we're constantly looking at.
Councillor White.
The point about shared services is very important, and Mr Tradewell has just referred to our relationship with the Midlands Partnership Foundation Trust, who deliver adult social services for us through a Section 75 arrangement, which has been renewed a number of times over the past 6 or 7 years. The opportunities around things like waste collection services are a fraught issue and have been for many years. I was chairman of the Joint Waste Management Board for Staffordshire from 2003 to 2007, and as you can see, I'm still not quite over it. The idea that we can work together is an ambition that is one that's been long held but been difficult to deliver because of timing of contracts. But I wonder whether or not in the future, given the improved relationships we have across the county, there is something that we can do. To the point about shared services and to the point about what is possible across Staffordshire and with other partners, the overview and scrutiny committees are now specifically mandated through the overview work to start looking at things like this. And so it isn't necessarily for the executive to provide the scrutiny committees with this is what we're thinking about doing, could you take a look at it and see if it makes sense. It is, as you'll see through the strategic plan for this organisation, these are the ambitions we have for the organisation, and for the chairs of the overview and scrutiny committees and their colleagues as vice chairs and members who are on those committees to say, you know what, I think if we take a look at this particular bit, we can come up with some ideas which might actually make Staffordshire work better. I think there's Mr. Chairman, if I may, a hugely augmented role for overview and scrutiny committees. Now they're specifically mandated with that overview role, which I think will be really beneficial to the running of this authority. Add to that, 47 of 62 councillors on this authority are now members of at least one authority, so district and borough plus the county or a parish councillor. That will add serious value to the opportunities that we explore together, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you for that, John Tradewell's section. We've managed to steer clear of numbers, but on our third speaker, I doubt whether we'll manage that. We've got Rob Salmon, who's the county treasurer. I'm sure we'll get into the nitty-gritty of numbers on this piece.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everybody. It is good to see you here in the chamber. Lots of familiar faces and one or two new faces, so I will introduce myself. I am Rob Salmon, County Treasurer for Staffordshire County Council. In local government speak, that is what's referred to as a Section 151 officer. I make that point because part of my job each year is to report to full council on the robustness of the County Council's budget for the forthcoming year. It's my view that the scrutiny role that you undertake as a committee is a fundamental part to help me arrive at that view. I think it has worked well in the past. It's worked well as a two-way process. So you have access to me, you have access to my team to provide information, analysis, to inform your debate. I welcome that challenge back because I think that challenge I get from the scrutiny process effectively helps us get a better end product, which is the position on the budget. So as I say, responsibility for the budget is to be set is for council, this committee, to engage in scrutiny of it. The other thing I would mention is there are other organisations and entities that have a scrutiny and a challenge role on us. Internal audit, external audit, for example. There are SIPFA assessments that are done. Alan mentioned the VFM assessments. There are others. I float that as an idea. You may wish to involve some of the people from those entities to share their views with you and hopefully get a better, more rounded consideration of the County Council's position. Just need to be careful we don't overlap with, for example, the role of the Audit Committee. I won't go through the report in detail. I will just pull out a few select points, if I may. Normally I'd do this in a logical order and start at the top that says the financial position and work through, but with a break in tradition, I'm going to jump straight into somewhere in the middle, which I think is para 25, and highlight the aim of the council in setting a good and balanced budget and the criteria set out in that part of the report. I'm just going to highlight one line, if I may, and that is one of the hallmarks of a good budget is that it's transparent and well scrutinised. So it's there. It is in the operating principles of the council, of this council, and I have seen those principles used and adopted by many other councils as well. But it is a fundamental part of the work that we do. The other thing I would just like to pull out and refer to, if I may, is estimates and assumptions. And I think that is a key part of the work of scrutiny to make sure there isn't optimism bias, that we can deliver the things that we've set out to deliver. Again, it helps to inform that overall robustness view that I have to make to council. Aspects of financial scrutiny are all in there. It is scrutiny of the budget setting, which is an annual exercise, but we've already referred to the quarterly monitoring. So I like to view this as an ongoing rolling programme of activity rather than a single event. The MTFS that the council operates is a 5-year plan. It rolls along, we drop a year off, we add a year on each year. And if I may suggest, that's probably a good way to view your work programme, because there is an element of scrutiny of the county council, which is it's just a practical thing. It is a big organisation. In total spend, when you include schools into the equation, well in excess of £1.1 billion per annum, plus a capital programme of around £130 million per annum. So it's big, it is complicated. Reference in the report to a working group, which I understand you'll be discussing either later or at your next meeting. I must say I do support that approach. I think it has worked well in the past. Having a working group just gives you more flexibility to be able to respond to initiatives, maybe to interview people from external organisations in a more informal way, while still getting the challenge that you need to have. Coming back to that point about the size of the council, I think some consideration of maybe a risk-based approach to your work. Already we've had a few topics floated. I would be absolutely surprised if we hadn't have talked about adult social care, which was Councillor Atkins' first point. It is one of the largest budget areas the council has got, and is worthy of scrutiny because of the complexity and the issues within that service area. Some of the risk issues are where spending is more volatile, more subject to external factors, or any changes in service and so on. So a risk-based approach is probably a good way to think about designing your work programme. And there are some points of good practice in the report as well. I won't go through that in detail, but the thought around a thought to leave with you is around who you want to invite, and maybe following on. It depends. You might decide to take a risk-based approach. You might decide to take a theme-based approach, or so on. Early notification of directors, of senior managers or members that you might want to interview, because there is usually a follow-on series of questions that is most helpful once you've had a chance to digest the information you're given from the first round. So great, Nick, that Nick's mentioned that you're starting early. I think take advantage of that and start to think early on who you would like to interview. And that's all I had. Thank you, Chairman.
Any questions? Councillor Salisbury.
In terms of the revenue that the council receives, is that pretty much known and fixed? Is that something that you can forecast very accurately? And if not, why not? And if yes, why?
In a word, no. To give you a little bit more detail, at the moment, I think the County Council's 5-year plan does fall into two parts. They're not equal. Current year, I have a great deal of certainty as to where we're at, where the funding streams are, and certainty over that settlement that we've received. But it's a 12-month settlement. I don't know with any high degree of certainty what the settlement's likely to be from April 22 and onwards, and that is a difficulty for us. It's not that long ago we were used to 4-year settlements. The last one we had was in 2016-17 for 4 years, finished in 1920. And that's, even if it's bad news, I'd prefer to know that bad news so that you can plan against it for that longer term period. It just makes things far more stable. It just aids financial planning. Where we find ourselves at the moment is we've now had 2 years worth of 12-month settlements. I fully expect to get another 12-month settlement for 22-23, just because of the position that the Chancellor finds himself in with the economy, paying for the COVID response. Brexit is still there as an underlying issue, but I'm not too sure has been fully worked through yet. At some point, there's a bill to be paid, and I would expect us to have to contribute to that in some way. The difficulty I find myself in is we don't yet know what that looks like. So just in terms of timescales on that, there are various announcements that the Chancellor makes throughout the year, but the one we really wait for is the local government finance settlement. That gives us the detail that we really need, which we tend to get in either mid to late December, ready for the April in the following year. it is short term. It doesn't help financial planning. That said, we do our level best to produce reasonable estimates, and I think that's the challenge for not only the executive and cabinet, but also in terms of scrutiny, to make sure that those estimates for future years are reasonable, prudent, and also well based in fact and analysis. Then we have to have that flexibility to be able to change and respond to things as and when they happen. Thank you.
Councillor Salisbury again.
Sorry for all the questions. I just want to get a background feel for it. What proportion of the 1.1 billion, which I think you said is the spend and therefore I guess the revenue per annum, what proportion of that is the settlement, and what proportion is all the rest of the income, and what is that income roughly? Where does it come from?
Yeah. Broadly speaking, the 1.1 million, about half of it is for schools. There's the DSG allocation that is allocated predominantly over to schools, with a little bit retained by the LEA. So that's half of the County Council's overall funding. The remainder of £530 million or thereabouts, the major income stream in that is council tax. Retained business rates is around, that's about 330 million. There's another 100 million of retained business rates, and then we get a series of specific grants on top of that.
Okay. I wouldn't be a proper politician if I didn't quote other politicians. I think it was Harold Wilson in the 1960s says that weak is a long time in politics. And then there was Donald Rumsfeld who said we've got some known unknowns. In terms of where we are, I think the MTFS plan for us to review would be September. So hopefully by September we'll know a lot more, or the government will know a lot more about how funding might be, and maybe it will be a bit clearer by then, but that's a wishful hope rather than a definite knowledge. Any other questions for Rob Salmon? No? Before we get into any other detail, I've just got some ideas or notes that I've made. I know members have had the opportunity to go into some training on overview and scrutiny, but very quickly my analysis of the difference between the two. Scrutiny is very much past tense, and it's saying, what in your decision have you thought about, or what have you not thought about? Is there anything you've potentially overlooked? Could you consider doing it in a different way? So that's the scrutiny role. The overview role is very much forward-looking. So it's saying things like, why haven't you looked at this? Is this something we should have considered by now? Are there other people doing other things that we might want to learn from? And the other thing that I would recommend that we do, and it's, I'm saying this at the start of our corporate review journey, if you like, is don't expect that we've got all the answers in the room. I think we found out to our benefits through Rob Salmon's contacts on the last MTFS analysis to bring in experts from outside. And I'm a great fan of the fact that if we keep asking ourselves the same question, we're going to get the same answers. So wherever possible, and I'm looking for Jill, who's now going to look at our overview scrutiny, Councillor Jill Heath, that we do endeavour to look outside the box and look at other authorities for what they're doing, other agencies that can give us advice. Again, referring to one of the things that was mentioned about the districts, boroughs, county and parish liaison, I know that's something we've really benefited from in terms of how it's attended to some of the issues with COVID. But I go back to the days when in multi-dimensional authorities, it's very easy to say, well, that's not us, and deny all knowledge. So I think what I'd like to see that corporate review looks at is how we fill the gaps and how we make sure that we don't have that situation that the example that Councillor Atkins was referring to, that returns to the high street. Well, it'd be very easy for the districts and boroughs to say, well, it's not us. It'd be very easy for the towns and parishes to say that. It'd be very easy for the county to walk away from it. But I think we've got the relationship now, which Councillor White has referred to, which is much stronger. And hopefully we can look at opportunities on that. Again, something we've looked at in the past, which I think will be part of the future as well, is looking at the stand or arm's length contracts. We've mentioned Entrust in John Tradewell's presentation, but there's also the highways contracts that we've got for both lighting and repairs, and I think that will be something we spend a lot of time looking at. And I think that's it. The other thing that I should mention is that we've got the benefits, if you like, that all of the chairmen for the other overview and scrutiny committees are on this one. So that means that we should be able to coordinate a lot more easily what we're doing and make sure that we're not trampling over each other, trying to do the same thing in more than one committee. We do also have a coordination group amongst the chairs and vice chairmen of each of the ONS committees, and that will meet very shortly, and hopefully we'll identify, if you like, 4 tracks of approach so that we don't get duplication and we don't miss things in between. So it's to our advantage that we've got the 4 chairmen on this particular group, as indeed we've got the audit chairman as well. Okay, that was it from me. Do we want to get into the detail of the process a bit more? Over to Nick again.
Thank you, Chair. So the only thing just mentioned to you again, for those of you that did attend the ONS training, this is the Council's Principal Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and as such, any call-ins undertaken of Cabinet decisions, either through Cabinet or through Cabinet member delegated decisions, will be considered by this committee at the earliest convenience, with the appropriate Cabinet member in attendance with their senior officers. And then the next meeting, Chair, is, as you say, at 29th of July. And at the moment, we've got down the first quarter performance report that the leader has referred to. And also at that meeting, we'd be looking to appoint that MTFS working group. So if members could go away and give consideration as whether they'd like to take part in that piece of work.
Yeah, in terms of the MTFS, we've normally had about 6 to 8 people on that group. They start meeting in September. We've got a bit of a cycle to achieve because we really need to have our conclusions by the end of the calendar year in readiness for reporting to the Cabinet what our views are in terms of January, and obviously the scene setting for budget agreement for the following year. So yes, bear that in mind that we'll need those 6 or 8 people in place. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Oates.
Thank you. Just a quick point on the work plan and the comments you've made about the learning from the relationships around the outbreak. I think that's something we really do need to look at, whether it's a case study, whether it's a working group, or whether it's a different piece of work. Those communications have been fantastic, and that relationship has really worked. And it's not just worked in the data sense that we were talking about earlier. It's worked in the communication sense. So all of a sudden you've got district councils saying the same thing as the county council and vice versa, which has been quite bizarre but very useful. So that was just a comment. Question in terms of the working group and the way we run working groups. I was on the MTFS working group last year, thoroughly enjoyed it. Whether my input was of any use is a different matter. But last year we were doing all these online through MS Teams. And we're now able to meet face-to-face, and it's great to be face-to-face, but I wonder how we're going to run working groups in future, because some of the working groups that aren't, I don't believe we're legislated to have them face-to-face, and I wonder if there's an option for a hybrid approach or something slightly different with the working groups as opposed to the full committees.
Can I pass to Nick for the technical answer of what's possible and what's not?
So, firstly, back to your very original comment about the work programme. So what we will do is we will populate the work programme with all of the ideas that have come out of this session. I think the chair and vice chair, with support from myself, will then look at, firstly, prioritisation, but also where the best way of that work can be done. So it could be as a substantive item on a calendared meeting, or, as been suggested, a working group or an inquiry day. If it's a much larger piece of work, it's envisaged that where that piece of work is either overview or scrutiny, the vice chairs will then take the lead on that piece of work and go away with possibly a small group of members to support them. Going back to your MTFS, so the legislation finished on the 7th of May that allowed us to hold our publicly held meetings virtually. So actually, we have to do this. It's not our choice. It's national legislation. So all of our overview and scrutiny committees and actually all of our publicly held meetings now are back to face-to-face. How the chair and the vice chairs want to run any inquiry days or working groups that aren't being held in the public arena will be up to them. So virtual would be a possibility. Mr. Tradewell to agree with me on that. Yeah.
Did you want to come back on that, Councillor Oates?
No, I can fully trust you, Mr. Chairman, to make the appropriate decision.
Yes, we have discussed that that option, and I mentioned earlier that one of the things we benefited from was bringing in people to an online meeting, which we might not have had as conveniently had they had to travel from wherever, book in and park and so on and so forth. So there is an advantage to the online, but I think we need to look at that as chairs and vice chairs. Anything else that we need to discuss? No? Okay. There is no confidential section, so I think we conclude. And could everybody please log out?